director of City Hope. We are a nonprofit in San Diego, California, and we're a trauma response agency. So part of what we do is help people leave a violent situation, whether it's domestic violence, human trafficking, child abuse. We work with first responders and are literally the boots on the ground to help somebody leave a violent situation. And I wanted to spend a few minutes and go over with you some of the protocols and some of the things that we've discovered and we believe are best practices to assist somebody in this type of situation. So we're going to talk first about doing an accurate assessment with your client. So if you've got somebody who is the victim of domestic violence, there is so much emotion going on and so many different moving parts and things to think about that it can be difficult for them to stop and pause and accurately assess the risks involved in their relationship. But that's the first thing that we're going to ask them to do. We're going to ask them to try to remove as much as possible the emotions of loving the person and knowing perhaps the person's good points and defending the person, or the anger, whatever the primary emotions are. We're going to ask them to just look at facts for a moment in determining the extent of the risk. And that's often important for them to be able to see that, to finally make that decision that they're going to leave. So as we're looking at the actual facts and risks, what we're going to ask them to do is, first of all, look at the likelihood of violence. Has there been violence in the past in their relationship? Has the person that they're with come from relationships where they have been violent with people before, such that that's kind of a pattern in their relationships? Is the current relationship they're in, is behavior escalating toward violence? Maybe the person had never put hands on them before, but now is starting to grab them or push them or be violent in some way. Are we seeing some shift in that, some escalation in that? Is the person using any type of substance, whether it's alcohol or any type of drugs, such that they have periods of time when they're not themselves? Sometimes clients will use that as a way to minimize the risk, but actually it can maximize the risk. It can increase the risk. And so they need to look objectively. The person has times when they can't control themselves because of substance abuse. That becomes an issue that your clients need to be able to consider. Are there periods of rage? Is there mental health issues involved? What are the access to weapons? Does this person have lethal weapons in the home that they would have access to? Because obviously that could increase and dramatically impact the extent of injuries that the person could receive if there's an altercation. Are there things happening in the partner's outside world, outside of the relationship, that is causing stress and concern and heightening anxiety or rage, such that they enter the relational dynamic already kind of amped up? All of those types of things could increase the risk of violence and the degree of violence and the intensity of the violence that could be inflicted on someone. And if your client can objectively look at those types of things and help making a determination on whether they want to stay in this relationship or whether they want to leave, that will help them recognize the safety planning that needs to happen. So if they're like, yeah, there's some concerns here, but I'm not ready to leave yet, then we can put into place with that client some good safety planning for if they're going to stay in the relationship or at least stay in the home for a while. If they do the assessment and they're like, that's it, I'm done, the risks are too high and the abuse is too frequent, then we can, and it might just be one time and they're done, which is wonderful too, then we can begin to proactively do the safety planning for if they're ready to leave that relationship. So it's important to do an accurate assessment with them. And then if they're not immediately fleeing, our next step is we're going to put emotional support people in place. And that may be you as you're listening to this video. It may be you in connection with a couple of other key people in their lives that are willing to be there in those moments when the person is in need of additional assistance, or they've actually decided that they're going to leave. So your emotional support people, you're going to identify them in advance and have your clients have a conversation with them. The conversation needs to go over some of the things that we just talked about in the risk assessment, so that the emotional support people are up to speed and know what is happening in the home so that they can be supportive. It's important that the emotional support people know, and that you watching this video know, that all of these protocols and all of these things that we're going to do to try to help get this person out of a violent situation, it only works if they're willing to leave. This is not us pressuring them to leave, because the most dangerous and difficult time for a domestic violence victim is when they're just left, or when they're preparing to leave, if those preparations are discovered. And so this isn't something that we can push. They have to want to leave. And if not, then you can have the conversation with them about, let's just put some things in place so you have options if it gets to that point where you want to leave. But I strongly encourage you to not force somebody to leave when they're not ready. That puts them in danger, and quite honestly, it can put you in danger as well. They need to be as invested with a safe departure as you are, for it to be effective. So they can identify their emotional support people, but we need to make sure that they know that their role isn't to try to force somebody to leave. Their role is to just really support them, and do some of the things that we're just about to talk about. So they need to know the situation. Emotional support people need to know phone numbers of people who are key in the life of the victim. Victims often think that they're going to have their phone and all these phone numbers are in their phone, but so often it's the phone that's broken in the domestic violence incident. So the emotional support people need to have key phone numbers for people important to your client. And your client needs to have some of those phone numbers memorized as well, because like I said, we may not have access to that phone. The emotional support people need to know and have memorized the address of your client, the address where the abuse is happening, the home address, so that if necessary, they can go ahead and dispatch and ask law enforcement to come and intervene if necessary. Emotional support people should have some type of code worked out with your client, that enables them to ask a question that's not, hey, hey, are you being abused right now? That's more subtle, that's more discreet, that's able to ask a question and get an answer and understand if help is needed or not needed. So maybe it's code around ordering a pizza, or maybe it's code around what the weather looks like. Have it identified in advance, so that it can be easily said and easily answered, and the communication be very clear. Your emotional support people can even begin to store some items that your client may want, but not be able to grab if they have to flee right away. And some of those things may be jewelry, or family heirlooms, or things like that are important, that ideally your client would want to take with them if they have to flee the situation. They can begin to store maybe some cash if your client is able to put some cash away. In a little bit, we'll talk about the go bag and what you take in the go bag. And so your client may be able to store some of the emotional support people may be able to store some of those items for your client. As you brainstorm what some of the special situations that your client is facing are, your emotional support people may be able to do some research in advance on those things. People sometimes don't want to leave without their pets, for example. And so emotional support people can maybe begin to do some research as to, are there organizations or agencies that will take the pets? What will the Humane Society do to help in domestic violence situations? Those types of things. And we'll talk about those specific cases in just a little bit. But they can begin to research the unique aspects of this particular case in advance. They can just begin to be aware of where there's openings in shelters and those types of things and different options. And they can just be there, and be willing to walk this journey with the person, which is huge. It is extremely important that we protect our emotional support people. Extremely important. And so to do this, we want to make sure that the aggressor abuser does not become aware of the identity of the emotional support people, and doesn't see communications back and forth. And so you may ask your client to delete text messages after they're sent. You may ask your client to delete emails and that type of thing after they're sent. All precautions need to be made to protect everybody involved in this. I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a situation in one of our cases where our client had actually left a violent situation on their own. They had, from another state, they had secured transportation and decided to come out to our region and and stay with a friend. Well, the transportation that they secured sent a copy of a receipt for payment and to an email address. And the receipt for payment had the new address of where the person was going to be. And the aggressor, the abuser, was able to look at the email addresses and actually found the address of where the person had relocated to, and came on out as well, and attacked her in the new setting with the friend that she had decided to stay with. So it's very, very significant that you do everything you can to protect the identity of the emotional support people and who is helping in the midst of this. So be aware, delete text messages, have code questions, and that type of thing. And maybe choose emotional support people that aren't incredibly obvious, and aren't the first place where the abuser would begin to go and to look for them. So it's important to protect their identity. Okay, so now that we have some of that in place, and we've done an assessment with our clients and deciding that we're going to start making a plan to leave. Now, this is not they're actually leaving just yet, or maybe it is. Maybe this is their first step. But these are the things that we want to put in place as we're starting this process. One, we're going to remember to keep a log. That log we talked about, and when we talked about our assessment, we want to make sure that we keep that log going. That's going to be significant as the person begins to look at filing paperwork to get a restraining order and that type of thing. We're going to ask the person to very intentionally start deleting their search histories on their computer, their text messages, their emails, that type of thing. We don't want the aggressor to be able to see that they've been researching these types of things. So they can begin to look at the resources that are going to be available in their city. Are there organizations like City Hope in their city that's able to provide somebody to walk this process with them, and even some of the emotional and financial and practical resources? What does law enforcement do? Is there a hotel that they would go to? Is there funding to be able to stay at a hotel? That type of thing. Start preparing. What is that first step? What resources are available? Perhaps finances aren't going to be an issue. Perhaps finances are. Perhaps the first thing the client would do would be to go move to another state and stay with family. Begin to look at what family is available, what family would be willing to help, what friends are available, what's in the toolkit kind of your client as far as what they would have access to be able to successfully leave this type of situation. So what do they have? Consider their resources. And then what's non-negotiable? What is that thing, if they're staying in the moment, that says, if this happens, that's it. I'm done. I'm leaving. And it's really helpful to have them define that so that they know when they thought, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, it's not that bad. When that thing that they said, this will not happen, happens, sometimes that can be a little bit more of a wake-up call for them to recognize that they're not in a safe situation. So have them consider what is it? What type of thing would happen that would trigger our planning to be able to have you leave that situation. Okay, and then start making a go bag. Start assembling some of the things that would be necessary. And these things perhaps can be kept at a friend's house, your emotional support people's house, or some place where you can grab it. You just want to try to make sure that this isn't discovered or found by the aggressor or abuser. And so, really encourage your client to really think about where they want this to go. Some of the things that they would need to take with them when they go in their go bag is all kinds of things for identification and finances, driver's license, birth certificates for the person as well as for the children, if there's children involved, marriage license, social security cards, passport, money, checks, credit cards in their name, that type of thing, financial information, any of those types of things. And then legal paperwork. If you've already started the process for a restraining order, you want to take everything that you have with the restraining order, that log that you've been keeping, lease agreements, deeds to your house, car registration, insurance paperwork, whether it's life insurance or health insurance, all of those types of things, any medical records or school reports, passports, divorce or custody paperwork, any of those types of things, those legal papers that will be significant for the person to have in the aftermath. And let me be clear, most of those things we can get our hands on some other way. And so if you have to leave in a hurry, don't wait and risk abuse to try to assemble these things. It's if you have the opportunity, but if not, what's most important is safety and that you get out. Other things that you'll want to have in your go bag are personal items, clothing, personal hygiene products, medications that you may take or your children may take, and then items of significance to you. Are there some family photos? Are there some of those things that you haven't already gotten to an emotional support person's place that you want to keep or your client wants to keep? We'll want to grab those things if possible. And so all of those types of things, maybe a stuffed animal for or a significant item for your children as well. All of those things get assembled in a go bag so that you're ready to leave if you need to. And again, if we've taken clients in their night shirts and socks and provided the other things that are necessary. And so if you don't have time to grab anything, that's okay too. So we've done an assessment. We've got our emotional support people in place. We've gathered some key documents and items that we would need. And we've done some research as far as what's available in our community. And we've done some good prep work as far as what would be necessary if we decide to leave. If for whatever reason you're in a situation where you have to stay in that situation, or you're deciding that you're staying in that situation, in a violent situation for a while longer, then I want to give you some special things to consider. One, go ahead and do an assessment of the house too. What rooms are safest for you to be in? What rooms have an exit point that you can use if you need to? What rooms are furthest away from weapons? You don't want to be in an argument and be in the kitchen where there's knives and there's weapons. If there's guns in the bedrooms, you don't want to be in the bedroom having an argument. You want to try to move yourself. If you have to stay, you want to try to move yourself into the rooms that are going to be the safest. And those are the ones with the least amount of weapons or things that could potentially be used as weapons. And those are the rooms that have access points where you can exit. Also think about if you're by stairs or steps, specifically if you're pregnant, you don't want to be upstairs in an argument where you could be pushed down the stairs. And so think about what the safest place to be is, and try to relocate the argument as much as possible to those safe places. Make preparations with your children. Plan escape routes for your children. And you don't have to, you can certainly tell them that it's for when there's violence happening, but we need exit routes anyways for fire or for other things that can happen in our home. And so have your children know where the exit routes are. Where would they go if they need to exit because of violence. Let them know that it's not their job to intervene and try to stop the violence, but they should leave the house and try to go get help. Teach them how to call 911. Teach them their address so that they can get assistance on the way for you as well. And have them have a go bag as well with items in there in case they need to leave quickly. And then just really some very practical things if you're going home to a violent situation that you can encourage your clients to consider. One, try to have your cell phone handy as much as possible so that you can call 911 if possible. Take excuse me, take care what about your car. Try to have gas in your car ready to go. If it's safe where you live, or if you're parking in the garage, try to have the driver's side door unlocked and the rest of the doors locked. Try to back your car in so that you've got a quick out if you're able to get to the vehicle and get out. Try to leave perhaps a little extra money in the car so that it's there. Try to have an extra key available to you so that you don't have to go try to find your keys. Or if the aggressor abuser takes the keys, try to have an extra key. Make one in advance if you can. If you are in currently being abused as well, and when you're actually being struck and hit, try to make yourself as small of a target as possible. Try to use your hands to cover your face. And if you're pregnant, try to get into the fetal position and protect your stomach as much as possible. Try to be as small as you can and protect the vital organs and the vital parts as much as you possibly can. That's significant as well. So let's talk about a couple special situations that could come up. We've talked a little bit about children, and you don't necessarily need to hide this from the children. Chances are they already know what's going on, and they need to be equipped and prepared. They need to know that it's not their fault. They need to know that it's not their job to intervene. They need to know how to call 911, what their address is, and who to go to for help. Can they go to the neighbor and ask the neighbor for help in this situation? Talk about those things in advance and escape routes in advance with your kids. We've talked a little bit if you're pregnant, to try to get as small as you can. Protect your stomach if you're being abused. Try to not be by stairs if the aggression is escalating. And then try to use opportunity at the doctor's office to let them know what's happening, to let them know what's going on. If there's any moment of privacy there, tell someone so that they're able to get some assistance. It's a great place for your clients to reach out as you're doing some planning with them. Pets and animals. Believe it or not, we've had people who won't leave because they won't leave their pets, or they feel like they have to go back because of their pets. So this is an important one to take into consideration in advance. And there's organizations, I know in San Diego, there's an organization that literally will take your pet, will house your pet, will love on the pet, and then be able to feed, medical, provide veterinary services, and then when you're relocated, we'll actually get the animal back to the client. And so that's significant for them to know in advance. So work out those things. There's even organizations that will take larger animals like horses and some of those things. So work on that in advance. Some states in the restraining order will actually allow the pet to be on the restraining order as well. So that might be something that your client wants to take into account. So just be aware of those types of things. And have that planned. Have that planned in advance. The other thing that sometimes comes up is that you might have a client that's not a citizen, and is concerned about immigration. And so they can look into some of that in advance. But non-citizens, they have, and immigrants, legal or illegally here, they have rights when it comes to domestic violence. And under the Violence Against Women's Act, they may have access to legal status here in the United States if they're a victim of domestic violence. And so don't let that be a deterrent from them being encouraged to leave if they're ready to leave that situation. Okay, so now things to think about when you're actively fleeing a domestic violence situation. The first thing is you want to make sure that you're not trackable. And we have so many devices nowadays that make us trackable, and we need to consider all of them. So things like your phone. Is there GPS on your phone? Can they track you on your phone? What about your Apple Watch, or any type of GPS on watches, on apps in your phone, your iPad, computer, GPS on your car, your children's phone, your children's watch, those types of things. All of that needs to be either turned off, or the location, the GPS disconnected. It may actually be safer in some situations to not use that at all, maybe even to leave some of that. I know in a lot of our cases with a lot of our clients, we end up getting them like a burner phone, a disposable phone with hours that's just not trackable in any way. And you really need to talk about this with your children as well, because we need to make sure that they know the significance of keeping the location quiet. Early on in our days, we put a woman with her 10 or 11-year-old child in a hotel, and the child didn't want to flee. And so the child found a notepad that had the name of the hotel and immediately called the dad and told the dad exactly where they were. And so it's very important that in your actively fleeing, that the children understand that that they can't do that they need to not be communicating with the other parent, and that there's that the parent that they're fleeing with is actively watching and keeping an eye out for these things. And so I know a lot of their apps that kids have and things like that are going to have tracking on it and that type of capability. So very intently look over your electronics and make sure that they're not being, that you can't be tracked based upon your electronics. Consider also what it looks like with debit cards and charges and on credit cards and things like that. If that can be tracked, and they can determine what your location is based upon those things. So when you leave and you're checking all of those things and making sure that you can't be tracked in that regard, chances are you're going to want to get a restraining order. And so sometimes I hear it's just a piece of paper. Well, it's true. The actual physical restraining order may not protect you, but the legal implications of having that restraining order can. And here's what I mean by that. First of all, it gets entered, the fact that a restraining order has been issued to protect you against the aggressor gets issued in the systems that law enforcement have. And so if a call were to come in and you needed assistance and it come up that there's a restraining order, one, often that will hasten the response of law enforcement, because they know that there's already an issue that has happened there and the person is violating that restraining order. Two, it creates an automatic new crime for which the person can be arrested. So without the restraining order and police come, they may have to begin to look at who's the primary aggressor, what's happened, has a crime taken place, all of that before they can force or encourage the person to leave. But if you have a restraining order, it is automatically a crime that person is there, which means law enforcement can come and immediately arrest them and make them and take them away. And that's significant. So as you're looking at getting a restraining order, there's community organizations that can help fill out the paperwork. But honestly, it shouldn't be overly daunting. Don't be concerned that this is something that is difficult to get as far as because it's a legal process. Most people, lots of people go through this without an attorney. So if attorney's available, great. But if not, go ahead and look at the paperwork. Have your client look at the paperwork and go through. That log that they've been keeping is huge on this part, to be able to remember the things that had happened. And you basically just detail out what has happened. And you name who it is that you want to be protected. And you can put the children on there. Like I said, some states allow you to put the pets on there. And then what literally happens is a judge looks at it, and it's typically an ex parte hearing, which means it's just the paperwork. It's just the person seeking the restraining order, and the judge will grant it or deny it. And if they grant it, it is a short-term one that you then take and have the person served, and the sheriff's department or local law enforcement can often help with the serving of a restraining order. And then there's a date to come back for a hearing for both parties to come to the hearing. And so you need to make sure that if you get a temporary restraining order, that you get the person served and that the proof of service gets filed. And that brings them back to the hearing for a longer term restraining order. And I think those are usually 3 to 5 years, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. So that's the process. Initially, it's not as intimidating as it sounds. So encourage your client to take that step. Once they have the restraining order, I always encourage them to keep a copy with them and to keep copies and notify people in key places. Key places would be work, so that work is aware. Key places would be things like school. If the children are on the restraining order and the other parent isn't supposed to pick them up, make sure the school knows. Give the school a copy of the restraining order. I also pastor at a church, and whenever there's an incident where there's restraining orders, I ask for a copy of the restraining order, and I ask for a picture of the restrained party. And I put that out with our ushers and our greeters and our staff and the children's workers, so that we know who to look for. And then we would immediately call 911 and be able to say, hey, we have a copy of the restraining order here with us. Consider it with friends. Keep one in your car. Keep one at, let the vet know. Talk to your children's sports coaches and let them know. And keep a copy handy just in case you need to prove and show that there is a restraining order that's in place. So you'll keep that with you. The other thing that you'll want to think about as you move further on into the being out of the violent situation is change up your routine. We've literally had people that have needed to exchange vehicles, so their vehicles can't be recognized. They've needed to move. They need to take different paths and different routes to work. I've even had some where they've needed to change schools that their children go to. Certainly they can change gyms, vets, all of those types of things may be significant. Think about having your client get new email accounts, open new bank accounts, all of those types of things, so that they're safe and protected and can't be found. And tell people, what to do, that if they see the aggressor, that they need to call 911 right away, especially if there's restraining orders in place. And then there's times when the family, the victim of domestic violence and the children get to stay in the home, and the aggressor needs to leave. On restraining orders, you can do that. Sometimes you can have it be where you get to stay at the house and they need to live somewhere else. And those details need to be worked out with the court system involved. But if you get to stay in the house, consider what safety looks like for you and your children in the home. Sometimes people may want to get security systems, motion sensing, lights, definitely change locks, and consider what safety looks like around your house as well. Maybe let neighbors know, so that if they're used to seeing the vehicle of the aggressor, that if they see it now, they know that that's not supposed to be. So there's obviously lots of things to consider when you're helping somebody leave a domestic violence situation. First and foremost, everybody needs to stay safe, including you. It doesn't help if we as helpers end up in a difficult situation. When early on, when we started doing this type of work, when I started doing this type of work before we had City Hope, I walked into a church meeting and there was a bunch of women that were there around this woman who had been being significantly abused by her husband. And all of the women were trying to get her to leave. And the woman did want to leave. However, she had some concerns because she had a pet at home that had been with her through everything. And she was so concerned that her husband would kill their dog if she left. And so everybody was trying to convince her that that wasn't something to worry about, or, it was just a dog, that type of thing. But it was significant to her. And so in that situation, I went in and got her and brought her to my office. And we began to talk through safety being our number one priority, and that we can take care of the dog, our number two priority, as long as we keep our number one priority. So we were able to navigate through, and we made a couple huge successes and great things to do, and a couple of areas of concern that we do differently now. And so we walked her through everything. I stayed in touch with her. I helped her leave, but I had been texting her. And that was our method of communication. And her husband was a military man, and had actually gotten copies of the texts and found out who I was and where I pastored. And there were threats made against my congregation. There were threats made against my family, knowing that that's where we would be on Sundays. And so the idea of looking and safely figuring out how to handle some of these things. If those texts had been erased after they were sent, that wouldn't have happened. And so we walked it well. We made sure everybody had copies of pictures and things like that to make sure that everybody stayed safe in the process. But to look in advance strategically at some of the things that could be unsafe and could compromise safety becomes very significant. And so we've talked about a lot of those things. We've talked about assessments. We've talked about putting your emotional support people in place and what they can do and what they should have. We've talked about making sure that that we protect them and protect their identity. And then what we do to prepare to leave, what we do if we have to stay, and then as we actually leave, how we stay safe and how we stay undiscoverable. So with proper planning, it can be done fairly well and without too many hiccups along the way. Even if you don't have any time to plan, even if your client is currently being abused and is like, that's it, we are leaving. Everything that we've talked about can be done on the fly. So documents can be replaced, safe places can be determined, clothes can be purchased. All of those things can happen. What's most important is they not be found. And so take every precaution that they not be found and that the emotional support people not be found by doing the things that we've talked about. And, know from this training and the other training that you're doing to be able to help somebody in these types of situations, you very well may save a life, and you may very well end generational violence. Because if we can get these kids away and we can help them see a different way of doing life, and be able to see that they don't need to stay in violence, they don't need to imitate the violence that's done, we can help make sure that that's not part of their future as well.